How's your shoulder?
It's feeling a lot better. Like my left shoulder, as you know, is like I could not do any type of benching, barbell, dumbbell work. I still don't do it. And the big part of why it feels so much better is just slowing things down. I do really slow eccentrics now. I pause my reps. I set the safety arms up on on my Smith bench press. I set it up just to where the bar is hovering over my chest. Then I pause it and I kill that momentum. And it's a controlled concentric. Like I'm not trying to start off like a race car and really just go fast. I'm like kind of like a diesel truck. Lots of power, lots of torque, but the bar's kind of moving slow at first, and it gradually kind of just picks speed up as I go. Those concepts just helped me out tremendously. I think it's just allowed the recovery. And it was kind of humbling because, you go from lifting X amount of weight to now all of a sudden you're like starting from scratch. But now it's like I built myself up from that point. So I reset, new baseline. Now I'm kind of going upwards. And the main thing is that I'm training, I'd say 90% pain free now on that shoulder. And I didn't see any atrophy or anything by resetting and doing things, because that's people's fears. Like, well, if I have to drop loads way down or cut volume way down, or, just changing how you do things, like there's always a fear of regression or maybe not the same rate of progression. Nothing negative happened. The only thing that happened was positive, because now I can train with relatively not that much pain.
From what I've seen on your IG as well, you cycle through movements quite frequently at this point in your career. Would you say that's an accurate statement?
I would say like I have a good handful of exercises that I utilize. What you probably see me doing is like one upper session I do one way, the other upper session is a different way. And the way I structure it is I think about the exercise selection. Like personally, I don't do more than, let's say, one harder exercise per session. So for example, if it's legs, I'll do RDL, but I'm doing an easier exercise for quads, like leg extension or a split squat or a sissy squat. One harder, one not as hard, and then the opposite. So on the other leg day, it's like a heavy leg press and then a hyperextension as my hip hinge. So I'm balancing things out that, because personally, when I do more than one harder exercise, I just get a little more beat up. It's harder to recover from. So I'm kind of thinking from more of a sustainability standpoint. And also, not to mention, of course, I'm prepping, I'm in a deficit. So I don't want the fatigue levels to get, way out there. And then upper body, I don't do any more than one pressing movement in a session. So if I'm doing that Smith flat press, then I'm not doing any overhead pressing. I'm doing a more of a lateral for my shoulders, and then kind of vice versa. On the other upper day, I do a dumbbell overhead press, and then I do pec deck for chest. Like again, with that shoulder issue and just, with 37 years on these joints, like I'm trying to strategically extend the career out. And I just think in general, like if I was to go back 20 years, it would have been a nice approach to even take then. I don't think it just has to be an age thing. I think it's just more about managing supply and demand, and, trying to figure out ways where you can get the most bang for your buck. And at the same time, you can get that recovery in there.
Would you say that's the same for the technique side of things that you were mentioning before, with slowing down the eccentrics, killing that inertia, like at the bottom of the press?
Yeah, because it's like, okay, now the eccentrics, instead of, let's say, being 1 to 2 seconds on the way down, it's been more like 3, sometimes 4. Well, there's obviously more tension, right? So you're getting maybe a little more benefit with the eccentric. Then with the pauses, like I'm killing momentum. So that concentric, there's no like whiplash, right? Like you're not getting no momentum generated. So it's like a dead stop in a way. So from the bottom, it's hard getting that weight to, start moving. And then you think about the loading, that's obviously a lot less loading. So it potentially could be a little bit easier on your joints. So like I said, I'm kind of getting some good benefits with lighter loading, but it's just in a sense feeling harder because of the way I'm approaching the rep cadence.
Do you think that would have been something if you knew, let's say 20 years ago? Would you adopt that 20 years ago as far as
I don't think my
prevention?
ego would allow it.
Oh, okay.
You know what
Fair.
I mean? It's like, oh,
Yeah,
I got to
yeah.
bench press 3 plates. It's like, no, what do you mean? You only want me to do 185 now or 205? I wish I could take the experience and wisdom I have now at this age and throw it into my 20-year-old self, 25-year-old self. I'd
Right.
probably be far more efficient with my training. So maybe I would have gotten to where I'm now, maybe a little bit sooner in the career. But yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like a bench press, right? Everybody wants to like put as much weight as I possibly can, laying on their back across their chest, and have these little tiny muscles push all this weight up. If you're in a life or death situation, like I would not want to be in that position where I'm flat on my back and have to push something off of me. I've kind of learned like the ego, I just want to get rid of the ego and understand what am I really trying to do? I'm trying to create a stimulus here and get as much out of it as possible in the safest way possible. Same thing with like an overhead press. For years, I was trying to do like 1 rep maxes, trying to work in the 3 to 5 rep range on an overhead press. Go back back and look at some of my videos, I'm like, man, that form just, wow. Instead of like my torso being here, it's like leaning way back, because the leverage, I just didn't have enough leveraging. So I'm asking momentum, I'm asking leverage to move this heavy weight over my head with these little muscles. Like, it might be smart just to kind of keep it in that 8 to 12 rep range, or even 15, up to 15 to 20 sometimes. And as long as you're getting close enough to failure, you're going to get a stimulus regardless. So it's just finding ways to train a little bit smarter, a little bit wiser as I've gotten older, to keep extending the career out longer and longer and longer.
Has that been something that you found helpful, changing the rep range for most exercise, at least as far as upper body? Because you mentioned going up even as high as 15, in some cases 20. I don't know if that's exercise specific, but have you found that that's been more helpful than being in like the 6 to 10?
Yeah, it's some exercise, context dependent, right? Like, I'm not going to squat doing 20 reps. I mean, I could, but man, that's like cardio and I probably end up throwing up. That's not very productive. You still have to find practical rep ranges for the exercise. But I think with anything bodybuilding, things can get a little extreme, right? You see some people in the gym doing laterals with like 50-pound dumbbells and they're swinging like Tarzan. They're doing like 4 reps. What are you doing there? And then again, you have guys doing 20, 25 rep squats. Can't you find something a little more practical than that? The high rep stuff too, like you got to think about, you could actually have wear and tear with high rep stuff. Like, took 20 to 30 reps. I figure doing that every week, week in and week out, week in and week out, that's a lot of reps, even though it's lighter weight. So, maybe 8 to 10 reps might be a little more practical, even though the loading might be a little bit heavier, maybe it's more of a little sweet spot for you. It's really context dependent, and there's a ton of layers to kind of sift through. I'm talking me personally, 15 reps, let's say, versus 30. 30 is just like, I highly doubt like I'm gonna have a really good gauge on what true failure is gonna feel like, because you better be going to true failure when you're going 30 reps. Otherwise, like, first half of the set, you're lifting feathers. That's what it probably feels like. 15 reps, I have a better gauge of kind of knowing where that threshold is at. So someone else it might be opposite. Maybe it's like 15, they have a hard time. Maybe 30, they have an easier time. You kind of have to explore for yourself and see where your sweet spots are at. And when you do find those sweet spots, you're locked in. You can put a lot of effort into it. You feel very comfortable and you can get after it more. But I also think you should explore too. Like, because I've explored 30 reps and I've given it some time. It's just like, this is not very practical for me. Hard to gauge like where my reps in reserve are. Lactic acid is just ridiculously off the charts. So I'm like, is it the lactic acid that's preventing me from pushing harder? Is it muscular failure? Is it this? Or I don't really know. But all I know is in that 15 rep range, maybe 20 tops, I know I can confidently get to failure or beyond it, or just right below it with a very good gauge.
It really does depend on the context of, how's this joint feeling? Like, maybe the high rep stuff feels better on this day than the low rep stuff. And that allows you to get your training session in, So I think there's so many moving parts. And as a coach, of course, you see that all the time, I'm sure, right?
Yeah, most definitely. But yeah, I mean, I can probably go back to my Instagram a year or 2 years ago and look at some of the stuff I typed up there and go, that does not apply now. Because there was a stint there where I was doing behind the neck presses, like, very comfortably.
Oh, right. I remember that.
More comfortably than doing standard overhead pressing. But now it's kind of opposite. Through the years too, like all through my 20s, I would do behind the neck press, no issues at all. And everybody's like, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. But I never went super heavy on it. It was always like 10, 12, maybe 15 reps. I never went super heavy on it. Then I had a stint where I did overhead pressing, but like I mentioned earlier, I got into like more of the lower rep stuff. And then I had a right shoulder issue. Not so much because of I don't think it's the actual exercise. I think what created the issues for me was the loading, the ego. So, and same thing now, like if I was to do behind the neck press, even if it's high reps, low reps, my shoulder's probably not going to like it too much.
So for like the pressing, for example, the overhead stuff, where are you at now with it as far as what feels good for you?
So it's kind of like loading. That flat press. Yeah, I like that flat press. I couldn't do anything like a barbell, dumbbells, because like trying to stabilize it would hurt. So I started off with the Smith machine, just like a standard front press. And same thing, incorporated slow eccentrics, pauses, controlled concentrics, and I gradually started to get better at it. Like the loading was kind of inching up, pain was kind of decreasing, and then I got enough confidence. This is like, we're talking probably 6 months to 9 months, somewhere in there, of doing this. And then as of late, like the last month or two, maybe 2 months, maybe, I've been doing dumbbells, like seated dumbbell overhead presses. And I started slow on that because I'm like, now I got to actually stabilize the dumbbells, because with the Smith machine, you don't have to stabilize. Right. And that's where my issues are, is just trying to stabilize things. I think I started with 50 pounds and I was doing like, I just do 10, but wouldn't push to failure close to it. Well, now I'm up to 60s and I can confidently do 4 sets close to failure. And the cadence isn't, I'm not pausing. It's very controlled, but I'm just happy that I'm able to kind of do it without any pain.
Yes.
But this is like a slow, gradual process. It wasn't me like, okay, I have pain. And then a month later, I'm pain free. I've been dealing with this shoulder issue for about a year and a half, 2 years total.
I was gonna, oh, because you were also doing like the push-ups, and are you
Yeah,
still
that's another. No, I kind of
no.
graduated away from that. Yeah, because that
Okay.
was one of the go-tos. Like I was trying to find exercise I can do pain-free. The push-ups, because it doesn't require a lot of stabilization, I can keep my shoulders packed. I can keep my elbows tucked, narrow grip. So that way, for me, it's like the further my elbows got away, my arms got away from my torso, it was just more pain because there's more stabilization with that. So more compact, I was able to get away with doing push-ups. I was actually doing some weighted push-ups for a while there.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah. And then I graduated to the Smith machine, but I'm not ready to go from the Smith machine back to free weight barbell or dumbbells on the flat press. I'm like, it just feels really good right now. So I'm like, it's not broke, don't fix it.
What you need to do is you need to graduate to weighted dips. No, just kidding.
I haven't done dips in ages. I used to love doing dips though. It's a good exercise, if you do it correctly.
It's fun. That's the only thing for me, but yeah, you can run into problems. I think it's definitely a little bit on the higher risk side of things.
Come on, it looks really cool, right? Like you got these big fat chains that you could put on. You got the weight hanging between your knees.
Yeah.
And now that we know, okay, we could do some length and partials there. Like, hey, you can lift more weight because of the ego. Well, it's okay to do it now.
Yeah, people need to be careful, and they're going to run into some trouble with those weighted dips.
Now,
partials.
I am being sarcastic.
Of course,
so hopefully someone doesn't take me literally.
What does your warm-up look like, both pre-session and warm-up sets? Okay, so I think he's referring to if you do any stretching or foam rolling pre-session, and then how do your warm-up sets look for basically preparing for, let's say, your first exercise? I guess the common thing that people run into is they're not sure because they might be tiring themselves out, or maybe they're doing too much or not enough, and then they risk hurting themselves. So that's actually not a bad one.
Yeah, so personally, I think it's a good idea to